The battle of Jericho, my Lord, Jericho, well, Jericho, well, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
The most outspoken opponent of the Booker T. Washington point of view was a remarkable black history professor named William Edward Burghardt DuBois. DuBois described how it felt to be black at the turn of the century.
One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength keeps it from being torn asunder.
Southern editors were uncomfortable with such thoughts. Wrote one of them in alarm,
"This book is dangerous for the Negro to read. It will only excite discontent and fill his imagination with things that should not be on his mind."
The editor was right. The book was dangerous, especially to black men and women who believed they had no equal share in this country. These people found the essays of DuBois a declaration of equality. The young professor found himself the spokesman for a new, more aggressive kind of black leadership. Said DuBois,
"The foundations of knowledge in this race, as in others, must be sunk deep in the college and university if we would build a solid, permanent structure."
Said Booker T. Washington,
"One of the saddest things I saw was a young man sitting down in a one-room cabin with grease on his clothing, filth all around him, and weeds in the yard and garden, engaged in studying French grammar. In our industrial teaching, we keep three things in mind. First, that the student shall be so educated that he shall be enabled to meet conditions as they exist now in the part of the South where he lives. Second, that every student shall have enough skill to enable him to make a living for himself and others."
Said DuBois,
"Can we establish a mass of black laborers and artisans and landholders in the South who have absolutely no voice in shaping the laws under which they live and work? Mr. Washington is striving nobly to make Negro artisans businessmen and property owners, but it is utterly impossible for working men and property owners to defend their rights and exist without the right of suffrage."
DuBois died August 27, 1963, in Ghana, Africa, at the age of 95. During his long, distinguished life, he was a scholar, philosopher, educator, freedom fighter, and author of more than 20 books.
in the last 20 years of his life, and even later, DuBois was the victim of what one black historian called Operation Forget.
History books rarely mentioned him. Colleges did not invite him to speak. Only recently has a new wave of interest brought national acclaim to DuBois as one of the most extraordinary men of the century.
Glory, glory, hallelujah, when I lay my burden down.
DuBois was unmistakably brilliant. At 15, he wrote a weekly column for the New York Globe, a black newspaper, and served as local correspondent for the Springfield Republican.
DuBois went to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. At Fisk, DuBois was surrounded by black people for the first time. He learned about the world of black Americans and saw, as he later described it, new and intricate and unconscious discrimination.
After graduating from Fisk, DuBois earned a scholarship to Harvard University. He became the first black man to earn the degree of Doctor of Philosophy from Harvard.
In 1903, DuBois published The Souls of Black Folk, the most important and controversial of his books. In this collection of essays, DuBois praised Booker T. Washington, but he also criticized Washington's ideas on educating black men. Wrote DuBois,
Mr. Washington represents in Negro thought the old attitudes of adjustment and submission. Mr. Washington distinctly asked the black people, give up, at least for the present, three things. First, political power. Second, insistence on civil rights. Third, higher education of Negro youth and concentrate all of their energies on industrial education, the accumulation of wealth, and the conciliation of the South.
Du Bois recognized the importance of vocational training for black people, but he objected to what he thought manual labor as the only way in which black people could immediately serve their communities and their country. Said Du Bois,
"Teach workers to work. Teach thinkers to think. If these things are so, how foolish to ask what is the best education for 1 or 7 or 60 million souls. Shall we teach them trades or train them in liberal arts? Neither and both. Teach the workers to work and the thinkers to think. Make carpenters of carpenters and philosophers of philosophers. We are training not isolated men, but a living group of men, nay, a group within a group. And the final product of our training must be neither a psychologist nor a brick mason, but a man."
In 1905, Du Bois started the Niagara Movement, a group of young blacks committed to organized and aggressive activity on behalf of the black man. The group met at Niagara Falls, Canada, and drew up a platform of action.
The members of the conference known as the Niagara Movement assembled an annual meeting to congratulate the Negro Americans on certain undoubted evidences of progress in the last decade. At the same time, we believe that this class of American citizens should protest emphatically and continually against the curtailment of their political rights, civil rights, and especially against the denial of equal opportunities in the economic life.
We urge an increase in public high school facilities in the South. We plead for an opportunity to live in decent homes and localities, for a chance to rear our children in physical and moral cleanliness.
We urge upon Congress the enactment of appropriate legislation for securing the proper enforcement of those articles of freedom, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution of the United States.
The Negro race in America needs sympathy and receives criticism, needs help and is given hindrance, needs protection and is given mob violence, needs justice and is given charity, needs leadership and is given cowardice and apology, needs bread and is given a stone. This statement, complaint, and prayer we submit to the American people and Almighty God.
The group was attacked for its radical attitudes, but it continued to meet. The following year, Du Bois wrote another set of resolutions. He said in part,
"In the past year, the work of the Negro hater has flourished in the land. Step by step, the defenders of the rights of American citizens have retreated. The work of stealing the black man's ballot has progressed, and the 50 and more representatives of stolen votes still sit in the nation's capital. Never before in the modern age has a great and civilized folk threatened to adopt so cowardly a creed in the treatment of his fellow citizens born and bred on its soil. The new American creed says, fear to let black men even try to rise, lest they become the equals of the whites."
In August 1908, a race riot in Springfield, Illinois, shook the country. A black man, George Richardson, had been arrested in jail for raping a white woman. Investigation found that Richardson had no connection with the crime, and he was released.
Feeling in Springfield was running high against Richardson, and officials planned to accompany him to a nearby town to ensure his safety. A mob of white citizens grew furious when they discovered that Richardson had been released. They surged through town carrying guns, axes, and other weapons, and began to destroy black businesses and drive blacks from their homes.
The state militia was called out, and 5,000 soldiers patrolled the streets before order was restored. In the final count, 2 blacks had been lynched, 4 whites killed, and more than 70 persons injured.
A strong current of pain and shock swept across the country. A group of whites called a conference to aid black Americans. The conference met on Lincoln's birthday, 1909. It included Du Bois, Jane Addams, the famous social worker, John Dewey, the educator, and Oswald Garrison Villard, newspaper editor and grandson of the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison.
They planned to establish a permanent organization to work for the abolition of all segregation, for equal education for black and white children, the right to vote for all black men, and the enforcement of the 14th and 15th Amendments. A formal organization was set up in May 1910. It was called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP.
Du Bois' presence branded the organization as radical from the very beginning. Many feared that the NAACP would be irresponsible. Du Bois was named Director of Publicity and Research of the NAACP, but he was the organization's only black officer. The start of the NAACP was essentially a white undertaking.
The formation of the NAACP reaffirmed the belief of many Americans, some of them white, that unjust legislation and policies toward black Americans must be corrected. In its first year, the NAACP launched a campaign to widen industrial opportunities for blacks, to gain greater police protection for blacks in the South, and to crusade against lynching and lawlessness. One of the NAACP's most important tools was its magazine called Crisis.
Du Bois' main job was to get the magazine going. The first issue appeared in November of 1910. By 1918, more than 100,000 copies circulated each month. Du Bois used the pages of Crisis to spread his message of black pride and independence. One of his editorials was called The Need for Racial Pride.
Instead of sitting sapped of all initiative and independence, instead of drowning our originality in imitation of mediocre white folks, instead of being afraid of ourselves and cultivating the art of sulking to escape the color line, we have got to renounce a program that always involved humiliating, self-stultifying scrambling to crawl somewhere where we are not wanted. Affirm, as you have a right to affirm, that the Negro race is one of the great human races, inferior to none in its accomplishments and its ability.
Besides Crisis magazine, the young NAACP had a second powerful weapon, the courts. White and black lawyers took case after case to courts at all levels. Within 15 years, they had won 3 important landmark decisions before the Supreme Court.
By 1921, 400 NAACP branches had sprung up throughout the country. Soon, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had reached out across national boundaries with friends and supporters all over the world. Today, the United States has dozens of organizations that battle on behalf of the black poor. But for more than 30 years, the NAACP led this fight.
Part of the NAACP program was aimed at opening up new job areas to blacks. But more and more, the NAACP concentrated on other causes, a crusade to destroy lynching, to secure voting rights for black men, and to put an end to all forms of segregation and discrimination.
Something else was needed to wage the black man's war on economic discrimination. In 1911, the National League on Urban Conditions Among Negroes was formed. It became known later as the Urban League.
The Urban League fought to destroy discrimination on the job market. From the beginning, the League won strong support from both blacks and whites. Its main tasks were to open new opportunities for blacks in industry and to help newly arrived Southern blacks adjust to life in American cities.
Branches of the Urban League opened in many large cities. League workers met new black migrants to the north and directed them to jobs and housing. The League helped solve on-the-job problems. It developed a program to train young black men and women for social work.
Another organization devoted to fighting for equal rights was the National Equal Rights League. It was founded by Monroe Trotter, a black newspaperman with a distrust of white people. Unlike the NAACP and the Urban League, Trotter's organization did not seek white members.
Trotter made no attempt to hide his contempt for white liberals. He had refused to attend the conference that gave birth to the NAACP. He opposed such institutions as black YMCAs and black recreation centers. He believed not in separate institutions for black Americans, but in complete access to all American institutions.
Trotter's battle for full and immediate equality was carried out in the pages of his newspaper, The Guardian, begun in Boston in 1901. The Guardian fought the program of Booker T. Washington and re-established the black press as a force in the black protest movement.
No thinking Negro can fail to see, with the influence Mr. Washington wields in the North and the confidence reposed in him by the white people on account of his school, a fatal blow has been given to the Negro's political rights and liberty.
Trotter had his own ideas of what black goals should be.
In detail, our demands are clear and unequivocal. First, we would vote. With the right to vote goes everything. We want full manhood suffrage, and we want it now, henceforth, and forever. Second, we want discrimination in public accommodations to cease. Third, we claim the right of free men to walk, talk, and be with them that wish to be with us. Fourth, we want the laws enforced against rich as well as poor, against capitalists as well as laborers, against white as well as black. Fifth, we want our children educated.
After the Civil War, the number of black newspapers continued to grow. By 1900, 150 black newspapers were published throughout the country. Some were dailies, most were weeklies. The majority of them were uncompromising in their demands for full black equality.
Their names illustrate the temperament and spirit of their editors: DuBois, Crisis, Trotter's Guardian, Robert Abbott's Chicago Defender, David Ruggles, The Mirror of Liberty, William Allen's and Henry Highland Garnett's National Watchman. All featured black men speaking about black life in America in the first part of the 20th century. Here is a part of a 1917 editorial from the Chicago Defender.
Get out of the South. If you can freeze to death in the North and be free, why freeze to death in the South and be a slave, where your mother, sister, and daughter are raped and burned at the stake, where your father, brother, and sons are treated with contempt and hung to a pole? Come north then, all you folks. For the hard-working man, there is plenty of work, if you really want it. The Defender says, come.
As black Americans continued to stream north to the cities, the black urban communities became separate worlds, cut off from the mainstream of American life. In these cities, within cities, the black press grew in size and importance.
Letters to the editor, Chicago Defender, Troy, Alabama, October 17, 1916. Dear Sir, I'm enclosing a clipping of a lynching again, which speaks for itself. I do wish there could be sufficient pressure brought about to have federal investigation of such work.
Lutcher, Louisiana, May 13, 1917. Dear Sir, I've been reading the Chicago Defender and seeing so much advertisement about the work in the North, I thought to write you concerning my condition.
New Orleans, Louisiana, April 24, 1917. Dear Sirs, being desirous of leaving the South for the betterment of my condition generally, and seeking a home somewhere in Illinois, Chicago, or some other prosperous town, I'm at sea about the best place to locate.
Led by his press and leaders of organizations such as the NAACP and the Urban League, the black man of the early 20th century could see progress. In 1913, the Emancipation Proclamation celebrated its 50th birthday.
At that time, black Americans owned 550,000 homes.
They operated 937,000 farms and ran some 40,000 businesses.
1,700,000 black students were enrolled in public schools, and 35,000 black teachers taught them.
But progress towards full equality remained uneven and uncertain. Racism and discrimination was still visible everywhere, even in the government. President Woodrow Wilson told a group of protesting blacks,
"It will take 100 years to eradicate prejudice, and we must deal with it as practical men. Segregation is not humiliating, but benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen. If your organization goes out and tells the colored people of the country that it is a humiliation, they will so regard it. But if you do not tell them so, and regard it as a benefit, they will regard it the same."
As World War I war clouds gathered, white America got ready to face German armies in Europe. Black Americans pitched in and joined in battle. In an editorial written in Crisis in 1918, W.E.B. Du Bois spoke for most black Americans.
Let us not hesitate. Let us, while this war lasts, forget our special grievances and close our ranks, shoulder to shoulder with our white citizens and the allied nations that are fighting for democracy.
Black Americans did close ranks, at home and abroad, and hoped that the war's end would usher in an era of democracy and equality for all Americans, black and white.